My Front Stoop family and friends, what's poppin' with you? This is Simeon. I am your host for the night. And I'm here with Dr. Carla Debnam. And we're going to have a conversation about how anyone that's having a discussion on racism, oppression, and racial injustice, and during these times, especially our black children, ladies and gentlemen, how are we having that discussion? I think that's an important topic for us to tackle right now. So do me a favor, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell. You'll be notified anytime I go live or drop a video, post in my community section or whatever it is. And I'm going to ask you guys, when the time is right, please call up. We want to hear what you are doing and how you are having this conversation with your children. That's the most important thing. How are you having this conversation with your children? So I don't know if there's a right answer, wrong answer, whatever it is. We want to know how you're doing it. I guess there could be some wrong answers, but we want to know how you're doing it so that you can share that information with everyone else and we can have a nice conversation about it. So I'll let you know when the time is right to call in and then we can have that discussion. But in the meantime, right now, I'm going to introduce Miss Carla Debnam to the show and we're going to start to have this conversation. Dr. Debnam, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me on this evening to discuss things that we need to discuss a little more often, apparently.
Yeah, definitely do. And that goes, obviously parents of black children, they've got to have a different discussion than parents of white children, right? On racial injustice and racism and oppression here in America. Before we even get started, you want to just, introduce yourself to everyone?
And again, I'm Dr. Carla Debnam, a licensed professional counselor in the state of Maryland and a national certified counselor. And my work with children and families stems from my work as executive director of the Renaissance Center. And we've had different programs and connections over the years with different youth programs, whether it's Head Start or particular programs on parenting training called Strengthening Families. So we've done a lot of community events over the years with our partners and helping support families in crisis or families as they continue in their work, upbringing their children.
Yeah, that's great. I know I do a lot of work with children and families myself. I do work with Head Start, as you know, but I also do a lot of. I run basketball programs. I do a lot of mentoring. And I work with children from, you know what? I don't work with the younger ones anymore. As I've gotten older, I started working with kids who are older and older, right? So now I kind of work with kids who are, between that 18 and 21 years old, doing mentoring, sometimes going into prisons and working with them. But throughout my years in working with children and families, I know there's a lot of conversations that are hard, right? I think back to 9/11 when 9/11 and my son, during that time, my wife, she had to rush and pick up my son from school, and of course we watched it on television and he was there with us watching it on TV. And I think at this time he's 6, 7, 8 years old. And he watched it with us, but I don't know if we really sat down and just said, hey, we really, really need to have a deep conversation about this, or as deep as we can get with him at that age. And we went out and we were, I think we were getting tires changed or something like that on one of our vehicles. And he was on the floor, there were some toys there. And I think there were Legos there. And he built up the Legos, built up buildings, and then he knocked it down. Right. And at first, my wife and I were like, wow, what do we do? Because there were people there.
Yeah.
And then we realized, we're like, this means that we've got to have a conversation with him, because clearly he's seen this and he's thinking about it, and it's something that's on his heart, right? So we've got to talk to him about it. We waited. I don't want to say that we purposely waited until that point. It's just what we did. When we seen that happen, we knew we needed to have the discussion. But what I wanted to ask you is, how do you know when to have the discussion? Do you just initiate the conversation, or do you wait until something like that happens?
I think it depends on your child, and every person knows their child, and some children are more curious than others. And like you said with your sons, some children mimic, what they see or what they hear, or they may raise the issue. In fact, especially if they have friends that are of another race or ethnicity, they may wonder is when they hear in the atmosphere different things about racial injustice, if they can still be friends with certain persons, and they want to know how can they still play with their classmates. So some of it depends on your child, some of it depends on if they're ready to have that discussion in the sense that they can understand it. And you certainly want to give them the information on their level.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't want to dumb it down for the teens and the young adults. You don't want to act like they aren't able to handle it, but you don't want to overshare with the younger children. And of course, usually with the toddlers and the really small ones, it's not something you really have to bring up unless they are presented or treated a certain way, and they may not understand again why they can't play with their friends like they used to. And usually that's when it comes up in these play settings, unfortunately, or for smaller children. But even for the older teens, I know my daughter, for instance, in middle school, they were assigned tables at lunch. And so the school made sure that the tables were integrated, that people of all backgrounds were at these lunch tables. But it shifted once they went to high school. Once they went to high school, everybody segregated with their own identity group, we'll call it
Mm-hmm.
that. And so while the middle schoolers were trying to say everybody's your neighbor, love everybody, hang out with everybody. And then we were discussing this even more recently, and my daughter said by the time she got to college, it was even less. So it was like the older she got, the more she was made aware of her racial status, and it was harder to make friends across racial boundaries.
Yeah, yeah. And so how do you, especially the younger children, right? How do you tackle the issue without, you've got to, like you said, you've got to speak to them on their level, right? So let's say,
Yes.
you got a young boy or girl who's 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old, right? In preschool, or maybe they're in kindergarten, and they witness some kind of racial injustice or racism. Another boy in school says, I don't want to sit next to you because you're black.
Right.
How do you address it to someone at that age who may not understand the entire history? If you explain it, how do you address it on that age without using baby words, but without putting it in a language that they can't understand? You've got to try to put it in a language that they can understand, but still not really sugarcoating it. How do you do that?
I think you just make it clear that you can, if someone says, I don't want to sit next to you because you're black, and you haven't identified as black, or you haven't explained to your children that people identify us as Black because of our skin tone. You know, our parents are Black, or where we come from. If you're not from this country, but your skin is dark complected, you know, these are some of the things we have to explain to the children. So this is what you say. Yes, they're saying that because you are of a different complexion. And so what if they come back and say, well, that doesn't mean we can't be friends just because, you know, they're lighter. And they may even bring up in their family where grandma is lighter and granddad is darker, but they're friends and they're married. So it gets into, it kind of can get awkward explaining the differences, especially if we have blended or I'm calling blended families, but you know, biracial families or
Mm-hmm.
families that are, are mixed with, you know, different races or different ethnicities or even different cultural backgrounds. It's hard to explain to children, but keeping it simple. We're just different shades. God made us all different. And some people just like to be with the people that look like them or around the same shade as they are. And but in our family, you know, that's when you start sharing your personal family values. We accept people of all shades. We love all people, and this is how you build up the child's esteem so that they won't feel like it's something wrong with them, not
Mm.
that it's something wrong with the other family and how they view others, but you want to set the values that are within your family and affirm that it's okay to be who they are, and the complexion and color they are does not mean they are any less valued or loved.
Mm. Okay. And look, I know, you know, it is very hard. And I like, you know, what you said, just, you know, be simple, you know, at that age, be simple. Those really, really complicated conversations are gonna happen later, you
Yes.
know. I know with my son, you know, I've had to have those discussions with him when he was younger. And when I had it when he was younger, I kind of took exactly what you said. I kept it simple. Said, listen, some people may not like you because of the color of your skin, or may choose to be with people that are the same color skin. You know, choose to be around people with the same color skin, um, and kind of had to, you know, just be there with it. You know, that's what it is
Yes.
right now. It doesn't mean that you have to be that way. That's the way other people are. As we got older,
Yeah.
I had more conversations with him because this was something that I was very aware about, you know, as a Black man. So I was aware, unlike with 9/11, that was something new to me. So I was like, okay, you know, what do I do here? But this, I was very cognizant of it. So as he got a little bit older, I started to talk more and explain more and really delve into and talk about history. You know, and I used moments, you know, if he would come home with schoolwork that had to do with Black History Month, or you know, learning about
Yeah.
Black history, we would use those moments to discuss history, helping him to learn his heritage, and then also current, you know, current news and what's happening today, you know, how things are today. You know, which was a little bit different from the way that my mother taught me, right? I was
Right.
talking to you a little bit earlier. With my mom, it was I don't even want to say a little bit different. It was a lot different,
Yeah.
right? It was just, you know, well, white people are gonna do this, white people's gonna do that, white people's gonna do that. And while she was not lying to me, uh, I would have preferred to hear it in maybe a little bit different way, maybe, you know, a way that was a little bit more, you know, taught me the history of it, right, and helped me understand who I was as a young man, and my heritage and things like that. She really didn't go that way. It was just, you know, white people's gonna do this, white people's gonna do that. Don't do that because white people's gonna do this and that and that and that, and those type of things. As I got older, for myself, I kind of just went on a journey for myself to try to educate myself, and that's what made me say, well, I've got to make sure that I educate my children in that way and explain the history behind racism and why racism is here in America and all over the world. Not to justify it, just explain why, so that they understand why it's there. So it's that was, I don't know if it was difficult when he was coming up to have those conversations. I had those conversations, and when there were things happen in the world, like what's happening now, we would sit down and I say, remember when we talked about this? Well, this is an example. That's kind of the way that I addressed it with him. And then now, he's 26 now, and our conversations are, of course, in much more depth, much more depth, and talking a lot more about activism and things like that. How do you feel about, this right now? There's protesting, a lot of, obvious, lot, protesting across the world. And there are kids out there, which me personally, I'm fine with. I don't have a problem as long as the parents are talking with the kids about why they're out there. How do you feel about it?
I think, back to where the way your mother was sharing with you how you might encounter racism. I think some of that was a part of their upbringing, and that they were scared. Their parents used the scare tactic methods of, this is how they are. This is how you need to be on the lookout for it. But of course, as we've grown and had our own children, we're trying to communicate with them in a more proactive manner. And I would say, with those persons, I've seen a lot of posts from people I know who were out protesting over the weekend with their children and their grandchildren. And I think it's a good thing. We were saying, my family was discussing this. If my mother was still alive, she would have been out there as a senior citizen protesting herself. And so this is something that I think is a part of our heritage. And so I think it affirms what the purpose of and the struggle over time. But I agree with you. We do need to make it clear with the children why we're out here. And you really use the same terms. Hey, some people don't like us because of these things. And as a result, some very negative things that you might have heard on the news or in the car when we were together, or you've overheard us talking about, that have happened to people that we don't always know personally, but we identify with them because we're of the same background. And as you can see, other people identify with the struggle as well. So that gives them a clue, a different experience, because it was everyone out marching. It wasn't just African Americans. And so you expose the children at a young age. And I think it gives them, it's a self-esteem builder. I'm out here fighting for my rights.
Yeah.
That my family thinks that I'm valuable enough that they're out here marching, and they don't mind bringing me along to be a part of something that could change the world. And I think it's how you frame the protests and the marches and the uprising. You make it a part of our cultural and ethnic identity, that this is what we do. And then you can use history. We've done this, from the beginning. This isn't the first time people have marched about these issues, but we marched a generation ago and then 2 generations ago. So it's always some cause for us to fight for. And you can also tell the children, we're doing this for you, like our grandparents told us, we're out marching so you'd have a better future. We can let them know, well, we're out still marching so that you can have a better future.
Yeah. I really, really like, and if anyone is listening, if the only thing you take away from this conversation is this, I really like that you said this lets them know, this helps them to feel proud about who they are, and lets them be, helps them to feel proud about who they are, and that young person's family is willing to go out and protest for their life and protest to make sure that they have equality, that their life is considered equal to everybody else's life. And that really does help build that pride and help build that self-esteem. And I don't, I mean, how much more can you tell your child, I'm proud of you and who you are. You're a beautiful child, and I love you. That's why we're out here fighting for your right to be free and equal. So I think that's pretty powerful. I really think that's pretty powerful. Now, how do we, because undoubtedly there's going to be people of mixed race. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, that, or children of mixed race, or families, mixed race couples, biracial couples, that see this video. How do you address this issue with a mixed race child? Do you rely on the black parent to handle that discussion?
I think if you're a part of a mixed race couple, and you take it upon yourself to have that conversation, I think it should be both parents sharing in the discussion if possible, because the child needs to know that both sides of their family, which is sometimes awkward, values them equally. Now, we do know that in some instances, persons aren't embraced by both sides of their families in these unions. And so that reality is something that has to be explained at some point as well. Like I never get to see this side of my family, but I get to see the other side of my family. And that's, I would say, would be the more difficult if they experience racial prejudice within their family system. And so it's like, how do you explain I can't go over grandma's because granddad doesn't like blacks, or I can't go over granddad's because his new wife doesn't like that, mom, that dad is white. It's just so it can be complicated now with so many, different viewpoints as we see in families. So I know one family in particular, it was a white couple, and they had adopted a young man from like Argentina. And so the mother's parents, when they would come visit, would say, well, those people, I don't like those people coming over here doing this. They're taking the jobs and all these kinds of things. And like she said, my son is like right here. He's like, this is your grandson that you're talking about in front of him and in front of, his parents. So it becomes challenging. But I think if the parents get to discuss how their children may or may not be treated in the culture, and if if it's difficult for one parent over the other to have it, go with the parent that you're the closest to. So, we don't like to say we have favorites, but if you're closer to the black parent, if the child is closer to you than it is to the other one, or vice versa, have that person have the conversation with them, as long as
Hmm.
it's the one that they, trust or have a good relationship with. But
Yeah.
it's difficult. It's very
Yeah,
difficult.
and I mean, and I know I said earlier, do you rely on the black parent? But of course, I do
Hmm.
believe it's important that everybody is,
Yeah.
everybody in that family unit is involved in that conversation, um, because it's going to be just as important that that child knows that the white parent supports their rights
Yeah.
and that and them being equal, um, just as well as the black parent. I guess I was more saying, do you have the black parent kind of lead the conversation? Um, but what happens if the black parent isn't around? Now, how does a white parent
Oh,
then come into that conversation?
yeah.
Or
Well,
how
and
do they
that's what I
initiate that
was.
conversation?
Yeah. Well, you bring it up. Usually, depending on the age of the child, and like the children will bring it up.
Hmm.
So they'll say, "Hey, I was at school, and Johnny said he can't play with me anymore because his parents don't like him playing with black people, or Hispanic people, or people that are different um, from him." And then I think that would open up the door for either parent. But if the parents aren't available, the ones, the black parent isn't available, like you said, because whether it's been through adoption or divorce or separation, have someone, maybe a friend of the family, talk with them that they identify with racially, and that could be a part of it. And you still, as the parent, you still are there for them, but you have someone that they can trust, that you trust their judgment, that they can identify with. And that's what I think would be helpful, that if the black parent can't be there, find someone else, that a trusted adult or a teacher, someone in their friendship group that you could rely on, or an extended family member.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's definitely important because the white parent, or I don't want to just say white parent because it could be
Mhm.
Asian, it could be whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Right? It could be whatever. They just aren't going to be able to understand as well, and probably and hasn't experienced the same thing. So I think it is important that that parent, the non-black parent, find,
hmm
even if they find someone, one of that child's family members,
hmm
if they have a good enough relationship. If not, then someone who can sit down and they still be a part of that conversation, and then from there, with your child, learn together, do the history together.
yes,
You know what I'm saying? Because then I think it lets your child know that, hey, I'm learning. I need to learn because I love you, and I want you to be proud of who you are, because no matter what, that child may be, maybe of a mixed race.
hmm
It's not going to matter. They're going to be looked at as black, you know,
they are.
um, and they need to be educated just the same,
Right,
and
and sometimes parents aren't aware of that when that this might be troublesome, because sometimes, when you love a person and you have a relationship, and the child is birthed out of that, you have them in a loving environment, but you're not preparing them for the world. around them sometimes. So sometimes it's not until they get to school that they
Mm,
encounter these prejudices, and it has to be dealt with. And the parents, you're right, are caught off guard or don't know how to discuss it because it's things they haven't had to deal with.
yeah. Um, and I think white families or families of any race need to have this conversation with their children.
Hmm.
Um, how do you know? How do they initiate that conversation?
I
Because
think, oh, oh,
because their kids aren't. It's not directly impacting them. They may see something happen to their friend's father, right? And they hear about it from their friend, and maybe they feel a little bit sad, but then they go back home, and it's not impacting them the same. So how do you have that conversation and kind of teaching the injustices?
I think what's happening now, and I watched a Facebook Live last week where one of the gentlemen said that in his community, it was the teenagers, two white young ladies who started a Black Lives Matter youth march in their community, based upon how their friends are being viewed and treated. Now,
Hmm.
the parents of the girls did not necessarily support them because, like you said, this isn't our problem. They go home, they're good. But the girls felt like if my friends are being mistreated, then I want to support and help my friends and that I go to school with, people I know, my teammates. It's just a lot of different ways that our children are connecting. And so they're seeing the bigger picture sometimes before the adults are, and they're bringing up the conversations at home, the hard conversations that their parents may not want to bring up. But if you're the parents and you want to explain to your children, hey, they may come to you and say, what's going on? Why is this happening? I thought these are things in the past. I didn't realize these things were still going on. I think this is the opportunity for whites and other ethnic groups that aren't used to being discriminated against to have that conversation, or at least to try to explain it, to learn more about it. And this is, I think, a time for those families to get to learn more about the people that live around them, instead of always saying those people, they're always complaining, they're not satisfied, or whatever ways to frame why we may be disgruntled. It's tough, but sometimes the children are the ones bridging the gap. So we're saying, how do the parents talk about it? I think the children are forcing us to talk about it. Even our young ones are forcing us to talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen multiple videos on just on the internet of white kids arguing with the parents about police brutality. um
Hmm.
and I think that that's it's something when the kids have to go to the parents and try to break down the walls of the parents, right?
Yeah, yeah, it is.
And as a parent, a white parent or whatever race you are outside of black, being black in America, you've got to listen to your kids and what they're saying. Try to understand what they're feeling, what they're saying, instead of arguing back. Listen
Right.
and hear.
Yeah.
That's what I think. Listen and hear. And try to understand the world that they're growing up in and their point of view. Um, It is a tough time. It
Yep.
is a tough time, and talking to our kids is, just like with COVID-19, right? We had to talk to our kids and explain, why you have to wear a mask, why you, or, how come I can't hug grandma, or
Right.
those type of
Yep.
things. You had to have that discussion. Now, right on the tail end of that, I don't even want to say the tail end of
Tail
that.
end.
It's not the tail end, but
It's
right,
right
right in the middle of it.
in
Now
the
you got to
middle
have,
of it.
you need to have a discussion about the racial unrest that you see, and I'm going to say for everyone, these conversations you should have them, even when when the nation is not in the midst of racial unrest. You should have these conversations, and then you have the conversations, and then when something like this comes about, now you at least have a base to say, remember when we had these talks before? This is
Mhm.
why we had these talks. But for kids, young people in America today, you know, weren't able to go to school, for the last few months. Been, dealing with that. And then now they're seeing this on TV. They're hearing
Mhm.
about it every place. They're going to need some outlets to talk. And parents, I think, are going to have to be open-minded, ready to listen, and have those discussions and hear what your children are talking about, hear what your children are saying. Try to understand how they're feeling, especially Black parents. Understand how your children are feeling, and talk to them about it. I think those conversations are going to be just vital. You know,
Right, and especially since a lot of our children are growing up, um, like I said, with friends from all kinds of backgrounds, and this may be their first time seeing, prejudice on this level, um, because they were born into a different atmosphere, and we were telling them, things will be different for you, and now we have to like walk that back a little bit and say, okay, well, you got to fight just like your grandparents fought for us,
hmm
and now we have to fight for you, and you'll have to fight for your future. So I think that's what we're seeing now. I can remember even sharing with my younger son, we were telling him, well, when people see you, they may view you as a threat. You might not be welcomed in certain places. And he would just shrug us off. He's like, y'all always bringing up the white, black stuff, y'all, because I mean, we were bringing it up because it's a reality. It wasn't until he went away to college that he was like, oh, okay, that's why I stay in my room now. He realized that it was a real thing and that he did have to have precautions and make sure he was, um, protecting himself from incidents or issues that might arise as a Black young man. And so it is tough that we have to have these conversations with the young men or the young women from middle school on up, basically, about, people may treat you differently or follow you around the stores. We've all been followed around the stores. I
hmm
don't know any Black person in America almost that has not been followed around a store. And so that could even be the grocery store, and we're followed around there. So it's tough to explain to them that those kinds of things still happen, um, and how to overcome it. But that is a part of the talk. These things happen to us, um, and
Yeah, and well, I think I'm hoping that during this time we have a revival of Black pride in your heritage. Just we have that revival. There's been a period of time where I just don't know if it was there.
mhm.
In different sects of the Black community. But hopefully, we have that revival. I'm gonna tell you one of the things that we're doing. you know, we're having a parent honoree celebration, right? We have one every year. And one of the things that we're doing this year is for all of the kids in our program, or all the parents who are being honored, we're having coloring books made with their parents' faces on top of a superhero's body. Right? So that we can, one is to help, we want that child to see their parent as the superhero, right? But then to see, them, to be able to see, well, look at my mom, my dad, they're a superhero in this superhero book, have pride in their parents, and therefore have some pride in themselves, and who they are and their heritage. That's, something we're really trying to push forward. I think just one last area I really want to jump into is, what age do you really start? I mean, I think very, very young. You start teaching your kids about their rights, knowing their rights. There's a book out for very young kids. It's called I Know My Rights. All right. You can purchase the book. And what I'll do is I'm going to put a link to that book in the description of this video if you want to take a look at it. And it's a book for kids that kind of explains to them what the Bill of Rights are and what your rights are as a human being. What do you think about that?
I think that's good. I'm reaching up by my bookcase, and this is my son's pocket constitution. So he used to, you get it, you carry it around, you don't want to whip it out, but this is about knowing your rights. So whether you have the pocket constitution or you have it memorized or different ways, it's important for us to teach them at home what their rights are, because what happens is people will go out and tell us what our rights are. And if we don't know, if we don't have a foundation, again, it's of your values, of who you are, then you will believe what others say, and then you won't know what you stand for, or you will let people treat you in certain ways. And this is what has happened over time, that we may know a little bit of our rights, but not the ones that can help us to be safe or secure, or those kinds of things. But a lot of it is what's happened in our culture is that even if I have the pocket constitution, I whip it out or I even know it, if the other person I'm encountering doesn't value me or my right to defend myself, or to say I know my rights, they don't respect that, then it doesn't work. And that's what we're seeing. I feel like that's what the protests are about. I know my rights. I'm standing for my rights. You don't respect my rights. You don't respect my right to be here, to be alive, to even to have a normal way of being arrested. You don't respect that. I know it's a process, it's a procedure, and how that's supposed to happen, but you don't respect that for me. So we teach them their rights, but we also, this is the Black challenge. We have to say, but others may not respect it.
Right. And
that's what our parents were saying, in their own way.
Right. And that's what it boils down to. We teach, your rights, we're teaching you your rights, but others may not respect it. And, we've got to go out and make sure that we fight for our respect, fight for our rights. And we got to start teaching that at a young age. And that's what these conversations, that's what these conversations are about. I do want to open it up in case anyone wants to call in. Maybe a couple calls if people want to call in and give a comment or ask a question. The number is 516-405-2246. If you want to call in and just give a comment on how you feel or how you're having conversations with your children and how those conversations have went, or if you have, a good strategy that you'd like to share that other people may be able to say, hey, I could take this back and use it. Do you have, where can you held up the pocket constitution?
Mm-hmm.
Where can people get that pocket constitution?
You can order these. It's I don't know, in Philadelphia, they have the Constitution Center. I think it's in Philadelphia. Yes, it's it's called the National Constitution Center. It's in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So they have a website, constitutioncenter.org, and you can order these small, handy pocket constitutions. And also, of course, I'm sure, you can get downloaded as well.
Yeah.
But this is something, that usually you get, I assume they still teach government in high school or something,
Yeah.
or some civics, U.S. history, some class. And, but this is, I happen to find this, and it's his pocket constitution. But this is something that we haven't read, who reads it besides in civics class, except unless you're interested in history. And maybe now more people are reading different things about history because they're saying, well, I thought this was over. And not realizing that some aspects or amendments to the Constitution expired and had to be revoted for, which the Voting Rights Act, people don't know that, portions of that were gutted. So it's different things that we have to stay abreast of so that if we're going to fight for our rights, we actually know what we're fighting for.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we have a phone call here. Caller, you live on the front stoop. How you doing?
Hey, Sim.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I always watch your show. I really love your show. I think it's a very good show. I never really called in before, but I'm always there talking to guys, Gamo, Isaiah, and everybody else. And I think you really have a good thing going. I really love it. But I was compelled to call in today. And I usually don't call in because I just like to listen to other people's ideas. But I just wanted to make a statement, towards what you're doing there and what I feel. Because today I had a conversation with a friend. Mm-hmm. And basically, what should I say? We got into a conversation of, like, religion. Because he's a hardcore Christian. And, to sum it up, he asked me, well, do you believe in God? I said, yes, I do, but it's a long story because it's not the same way that you do. But basically, my point is people with different religion, it's pretty much the same thing we're going through with this slavery. And in my opinion, everybody has to respect another person's opinion. So we really have to start basically with ourselves. Like, so whatever your religion is, it's supposed to be okay because we're all thinking of the same thing, but we're using different names and depends on where you came from. But basically, we all believe in a higher power. Now, as far as the kids, how do we talk to our kids? In my situation, my kids, they never really watch TV. There was no TV watching, and we just did things organically in my household. So probably wasn't a real big need to, like, have conversation because they just pretty much grew that. Okay. Like, everything was open in the house, and you have to start from day one. Right. Sometimes I could be talking to my wife, and I know my kids are hearing. So the conversation is based on them hearing. So I'm actually talking to them, directing at her.
Right.
And it's just a strategy of while you're raising the kids. Because to have a conversation with them, that's one method. That could work also. But if you just grow it from day one, you know what you're doing. You know how you're nurturing your family. You have to keep certain things away from them, and you have to just basically just grow it. This is just what it is. You know everything, not everything, but you know what you're supposed to know just through the levity of how we live.
Okay. Good. And listen, I respect everything that you just said. The only thing that I would like to add to that, and Dr. Debnam, you can add your opinion to this as well, is because I think we were having this conversation before we got on. A lot of times it does happen that way, where you're having a conversation with your wife or a friend or whoever, and the kids over here. And in my opinion, the only issue I have with that is that at a certain age level, the kids may not understand what they heard.
All right, I understand that, because sometimes you're going to hear things, but you're not going to understand it. Then you're going to hear it again.
Right. And even though it's a great thing that you limit the television and all of those things, but
no, we didn't have television. We just didn't have television.
No, I feel you on that too. But they're still in school, out with the friends. At this moment, they're probably not out with friends and stuff like that. Different things they hear different things and stuff like that.
Right.
But if
you have
that, if you have that open relationship like you say you have at home, then they'll bring it to you. I think if they feel like they're open to talk about anything, then they'll bring it to you, I believe.
Oh yeah. Whatever an issue is going on, we discuss it. But even before it gets to be an issue, it's just a part of the living. And yeah. I mean, I don't know really how to say that, but the way we did it, it was just, it was just like growing it.
I think I understand what you're saying. Almost like you don't have to say, okay, listen, we've got to sit down and have this conversation.
Right.
It's something that's talked about frequently, and it happens because it's talked about.
And like I was saying, like I was saying before, like when I'm talking to my wife and I am also speaking to them, it's not that I'm trying to, maybe like lecture them or giving them something. It's just the ears and the mind. Because, a conversation similar to that in the future will come again, and, it's just in them. Because we used to use this strategy. It's like, my wife and I also, in discipline the kids, right, when they did something, that's not right, we used to kind of welcome that so we could discipline them. Like, we never really beat them because they did something wrong. That wasn't like really a part of it. We look at when they did something that was not favorable, a time to really teach as opposed to discipline. And when you do that at a young age, right, when it comes to the time when you have the discipline, you don't really have the discipline because they already understand that the mistake is made or they went out of bounds.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I don't really know how to really explain it, but it's just the only way I can say we call it just liberty.
Okay. No, I think I understand, because I know when I was young and, I started doing something and I look at my mother and she looked at me, and she didn't have to say anything. I already knew what that look was saying,
exactly.
And I knew when I got home that, something might happen, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, my man.
Now, imagine if somehow subconsciously in their mind, the reasoning for that look was already implemented. So now that look wouldn't have to be so hard where it's scolding.
No, right. I
Right,
understand.
that look would just be like acknowledging as opposed to be scolding.
Right. The eye contact, we both acknowledge, okay, something's not right.
That's why. That's why just being around the family is so important. I mean, I used to do whatever to get home and be home.
Yeah.
You know, because that when I got home it was like, yes, I had to work. You know, I purposely worked a certain style just to be home.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, where I would go out and I would be gone for 7 days for like maybe 2 months, 3 months. And after that, I was home for maybe 2 months, 3 months.
Yeah. All right. Hey, my man.
So
I want to.
It's that time that's very important.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to thank you for the call.
Things will just be learned instead of like really teaching. It's just learned.
Right. Definitely. I thank you for the call. Appreciate your call. Dr. Debnam, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I was thinking what he was saying. I agree that some atmospheres, some family styles are such that you do just learn as you grow, and it's organic. It's not anything forced. It's just a part of the family dynamics. And so I think that's what he was saying, that the way he and his wife raised their children, it was just a part of, they learned as they went along, and they just knew what their family values were from the way they lived them. So, and that was something that they could always bring to their remembrance or to add on to. They didn't have to have these growth conversations. It was just natural conversation.
Yeah, right. Because of family values, and that's so that right there, the family values, so important. Well, Dr. Debnam, I know it's it's starting to get pretty late.
Yes,
all right, so
it is.
I really appreciate you taking the time to come on with us and have this conversation. And I'm pretty sure that there will be people who join join and watch this video later on, and I hopefully, and I believe they will take a lot from it. I'll have your contact information in the description of this video in case people want to get in contact with you, for whatever the reason is. Any last thing you want to just share with the people?
I would just say keep the conversations going, especially with the children. Don't be short with them, but be as compassionate as you possibly can, and explain things in a loving way so that they can feel valued and loved, even while all these things are happening in our culture, that they don't have to question if they're loved or valued at home.
All right. Dr. Debnam, thank you very much, and I'm sure I'll be talking with you soon.
Yes, great.
All right. Have a good evening.
All right, you too.
Peace.